Trigger warning. The following story contains graphic descriptions of violence that may be disturbing to some viewers. Viewer discretion is advised. Welcome back to Once Upon a Crime South Africa. Today, we bring you a chilling story that spans 2 continents. The tale of a man who left the comfort of England for the raw beauty of the South African landscape, only to be met with unspeakable violence. This is the tragic story of Christopher Preece, a British engineer who sought to build a sanctuary not just for himself, but for injured wildlife and endangered species. A man of intellect and compassion, Chris dedicated his life to engineering and nature conservation. But in 2012, his dream turned into a nightmare. On a quiet rural property near the town of Vicksburg, Chris's life came to a brutal end in a machete attack that shocked both South Africa and the United Kingdom. Was it a simple robbery gone wrong, or was there something more sinister behind the attack? And what became of the assailants who shattered this peaceful haven? Let's begin with the life of the man behind the headlines, who Chris Preece really was. Christopher Preece was born in Southgate, North London, around 1958. From a young age, Chris was known for his quiet demeanor, inquisitive mind, and love for the natural world. While other boys spent their days playing football, Chris was often in the garden, exploring insects, feeding birds, or reading science books. He excelled academically, particularly in mathematics and physics, leading him to pursue a degree in engineering. He later specialized in geotechnical engineering, a field that combined his love for science, land, and environmental stability. By the time he entered his 30s, Chris had established himself as a respected professional working on infrastructure projects across the UK. By the early 1990s, Chris Preece was in his mid-30s, established in his engineering career, and living a stable life in the UK. But something within him had begun to stir, a longing not just for change, but for meaning. Though his life in England was secure, it lacked the deep connection to nature and wide open space that had always called to him. He and his wife, Felicity, shared a quiet dream to one day live somewhere where the sky stretched further, where animals roamed freely, and where they could do more than simply exist, they could build. That dream took shape in 1995, when the couple made the bold decision to emigrate to South Africa. It wasn't a casual move. South Africa, fresh out of apartheid, was undergoing major political and social change. Many saw it as unstable, but Chris saw opportunity not just in work, but in life. They settled in Johannesburg, where Chris began working as a geotechnical engineer, helping assess soil and rock conditions for construction projects. His skills were in demand, and the work was challenging, but Chris never lost sight of their greater vision. Within months, the couple purchased a plot of land near the small farming town of Vicksburg, in the Free State province near the Lesotho border. The land was rugged, wild, and breathtaking. It was there that Chris and Felicity founded Fleur de Lis Farm. But this was no ordinary farm. Their goal was to rehabilitate injured animals, to create a nature reserve where wildlife like owls and cheetahs could be nursed back to health and returned to the wild. Weekends were spent not on leisure, but on building enclosures, planting indigenous plants, and creating a space where animals and humans could live in harmony. Chris wasn't seeking fame or fortune. He wanted to live quietly, work the land, and protect what others had forgotten. In every fence he built, every animal he fed, there was purpose, peace. And for nearly 2 decades, Chris and Felicity did just that, dividing their time between Johannesburg and their beloved farm. The couple found joy in the simplicity of rural life, in sunsets over the veld, in the quiet calls of rescued owls. But in the beauty of the South African bush, there also lurked danger, a darkness that would eventually bring their dream to a tragic and violent end. It was a quiet evening on Saturday, the 24th of November 2012, at Fleur de Lis Farm, nestled in the scenic but isolated hills of Vicksburg, Free State. Preece, a 54-year-old British-born geotechnical engineer, and his wife Felicity were enjoying another peaceful weekend surrounded by nature. Owls nested nearby, the air was cool, and the day had been uneventful. But somewhere in the shadows, danger was lurking. Earlier that day, something had already been off. The couple's two guard dogs, normally energetic and alert, were unusually subdued. They didn't bark, didn't stir. What the Preeces didn't know was that their attackers had poisoned the dogs in preparation for what was to come. Around 9:30 p.m., the power at the farm suddenly cut off. In rural South Africa, power outages aren't uncommon, and Chris didn't hesitate. Grabbing a flashlight, he stepped outside to check the power box, as he had done many times before. That's when they struck. Out of the darkness emerged three men, armed with pangas-long, curved machetes often used in farming, now turned into tools of death. Chris had little time to react. The men set upon him violently, surrounding him near the gate. He turned and ran back toward the house, yelling for help. But they chased him down. As he burst through the door, trying to reach safety, they followed, forcing their way inside. A vicious struggle unfolded in the hallway. Chris, despite being unarmed and outnumbered, fought for his life. The attackers stabbed him multiple times in the chest and upper body, the blade of a machete cutting through bone and muscle with each blow. Felicity, hearing her husband's screams, rushed in only to become the next target. She was bludgeoned and stabbed, suffering a fractured skull and numerous lacerations to her body and head. Despite the pain, she managed to crawl to the phone and tried to summon help. The attackers then fled, taking with them a cell phone and about 3,000 rands in cash. When paramedics arrived, the scene was harrowing. Chris Preece lay lifeless in a pool of blood, his body hacked and broken. Felicity was barely conscious, but alive, a survivor of a brutal assault. Investigators later confirmed that the power was intentionally cut and the dogs deliberately poisoned, suggesting a premeditated attack. Yet, despite the savagery, the stolen items pointed to robbery as a possible motive, but many, including family and locals, questioned whether something more targeted had occurred. Sadly, despite public outrage and cross-border pressure from the UK government, no suspects were ever arrested, and the case remains unsolved to this day. Local investigators speculated it may have been a robbery, but questions remained. Why target this farm when there were others nearby? Why go to such lengths poisoning dogs, waiting in ambush for such a meager haul? The South African Police Service, SAPS, launched an investigation, but without arrests or solid leads, the case began to fade from public attention. The lack of justice in Chris Preece's case reflects a wider issue: the high number of unsolved rural crimes in South Africa, especially those targeting foreign nationals or conservationists living in isolated areas. Chris Preece's death wasn't just the loss of a husband, father, and engineer. It was a loss to conservation, a loss to peace, a loss to a dream that one man could build something good and live simply among the land and animals he loved. His story serves as a painful reminder of the fragility of life in rural South Africa and the dangers faced by those who choose to live off the grid. But it also highlights the courage of people like Felicity Preece, who survived an unimaginable trauma and still spoke out for justice. To this day, no one has been held accountable for Chris's murder. And so, we remember him here. Not just as a victim, but as a man who came to South Africa to build something better. A man who deserves to be more than a headline. If you found this story important, please consider subscribing to Once Upon a Crime South Africa. Like, comment, and share, not just for the algorithm, but to keep these stories alive. Thank you for watching.